So I thought, since we all have a little bit, maybe more time on our hands, depending on what field we're in, or if we're college students that are remotely learning, or parents and kids that have more time because some of our activities have been canceled, thought this might be a great way to do some informational webinars that you can watch together with your family, and we can have a little quality time this way. And certainly I'll record these for later distribution if anybody is interested in that. So I picked a topic that we could actually spend quite a bit of time on, and figured we would just start with horse behavior, and kind of make this a series because there's quite a bit that we could talk about on horse behavior. So we're going to start talking about some general things about behavior, and then we're going to start our series with talking about the horse senses, but we're not going to do all the senses tonight, or you'd have to be here all night. So we'll go ahead and get started. So when we think about horse behavior, any animal behavior, really when we just use that word behavior, that is whatever the animal is doing that is reacting to a stimuli. So we're going to get really detailed about this. So that behavior, what the animal is doing, is a product of its biology, so the internal stimuli it's receiving, as well as it's an environment. And so the environment is going to create external stimuli. So even if we look at this picture of horses here, so we have some horses that are eating. So they have an internal stimulus, which is hunger, which is going to cause them to put their head down and eat. You can also see some other behaviors that they're doing where these horses are staying together in a herd, and that again is part of their internal stimuli. This is their normal behavior. So their motivation is always going to be to stay together. So even a rather static, peaceful picture of horses, if we really think about it, there's a lot of things that are feeding in to that animal that create that behavior. So we'll see if anybody is out there that wants to play along with this game. So if you're looking at this picture of a mare and a foal, what behaviors do you actually see that are occurring, and what stimuli is the animal receiving to make them do that behavior, and is that an internal or external stimuli? So I'm gonna let's see if anybody can type in what they see is happening, what behaviors are happening, and what do they think the stimuli is. So we'll wait a little bit, see if we get anybody to give us a response. Don't see any comments yet, so I will have to help you guys out a little bit. And again, this is more fun if we play together. So if we look at the dam, so the mare that's on the left side of this picture, she's eating, so similar to the previous picture. So her behavior is being created by an internal stimulus to eat, right? So if she has hunger, that's the stimulus that's causing her to eat. We look at the little foal, he's scratching his head. So that would actually, we could think about this as he is experiencing itching behavior, right? So his nerves are experiencing that itch sensation, but it's probably created by something external. Okay, so maybe a fly or an insect bit the foal, and that created then the perception of that feeling, which travels to the nervous system, and that's why we get that behavior. So even some simple things we can think about in rather complex manner as we talk about behavior. So I'm going to use kind of some big words here tonight and get into the science of things a little bit. So ethology is essentially the study of how animals behave. So that ethology, that natural behavior of an animal, is going to vary depending on the animal. So essentially my dog's ethology is going to be different from my cat and versus my horse. So ethologists are essentially scientists that study how types of animals behave and why species react differently. So, and that's actually fairly important for us when we think about handling and managing horses. So in this picture of My Little Pony here, if we don't understand that a horse's normal ethology might be to spook or react to these flags, the bags on a stick essentially, then that might allow us to get hurt rather easily. So really understanding some of that flight response in horses. And if we understand horses' ethology or their natural behavior, we can manage them better. So the horse's desire to eat throughout the day, or the horse's desire to move, those are all normal behaviors that are a product of its normal species behavior. So again, ethology allows us to describe those natural or normal species behavior, and that would let us understand a little bit better about what the animal is doing. So again, we're going to kind of go through some science parts here. So stimuli is essentially what the animal is perceiving. These are inputs into the animal's nervous system. So inputs into the nervous system are going to come both from internal, so we talked about that, so hunger, thirst, pain, essentially those are internal stimuli. And then there's external stimuli, so things that are happening in the animal's environment. So the input coming into the eyes or the ears of the horse, that's coming from the environment. It's going to be perceived, right? So that's what we're talking about. And then the nervous system is going to do something, okay? So that's all these inputs coming in. And all of these inputs are going to be perceived essentially by different specialized receptor cells. So we're going to try again to see if anybody's out there joined with us to provide a little bit of feedback. So I want to see if anybody would know what a photoreceptor would receive. What information is a photoreceptor perceiving? And then we'll try a little bit harder one. What would a nociceptor be receiving? So we'll see if we have any feedback on that. Try a little bit harder one. Okay, we'll see if we have any comments. Anybody want to give it a try? What would a photoreceptor be perceiving? And what a nociceptor would be perceiving? You can type it in the comments on our Facebook Live. Be brave, gang. Okay, so photoreceptor is going to be picking up light. Okay, so the eye has photoreceptors in it. A nociceptor, actually those are in the dermal layer of the skin, that actually is going to detect pain. So horses and people have specific receptors that are responsible for the detection of pain and telling essentially the nervous system, hey, maybe move away from that or limit their movement. So again, trying to think about how animals perceive the world or how horses perceive the world is what ethology is all about. So we really want to understand horse behavior and try to think like them. So for a horse that would be perceiving this stimuli here, which is just essentially a garden hose, you can imagine, due to their nature, what might the horse be thinking? Well, the horse might actually perceive that hose on the ground as a snake or something sinister like that. That's why horses often will spook or react pretty violently to things that we think are pretty normal everyday occurrences. So we're going to do a little bit of science again. So I've got two brains on my slide here. So a horse brain and a human brain. So we're going to take a look at these brains and figure out why they're, what is different about them and what might be important for us as horse owners. So horses, which is the brain on the left, horses actually have a pretty large cerebellum. So the cerebellum essentially coordinates all of that sensory input. It helps with balance, movement, again, coordinated response. So horses really are physiologically designed to react pretty quick, okay? versus our human brain on the right. If we look at that brain, it has a much larger, more complex cerebral cortex. So that is the part of our brain that allows us to think and rationalize. So you would expect, right, if something is out there that can be scary, a human theoretically should be more rational about that and able to think through the situation. Or again, the horse with that large cerebellum that is all about movement, reaction, coordinated response is going to flee first again and ask questions later. So a little bit of a science dive there on our horse brains. So again, we're going to go back a little bit to ethology of horses. So horses, their natural ethology, or where they originated, were plains grazers. So relatively low value forage that they had to travel a lot to consume enough to meet their nutrient requirements. So horses' natural ethology is wired for that continual movement and continual eating based off of our knowledge of what their natural behavior is. So we all think about characteristics of horses, and they're wonderful companions, and we really treasure them for their athletic ability. But we're going to talk a little bit again about what their ethology is, or what their natural behavior pattern is. So just like my first picture, which we talked about, horses are very much herd animals. So they're going to always feel safer in herd environments. Horses are willing to hurt themselves if they're separated or isolated from other horses. If they panic, they're willing to go through or over fences, which can be pretty detrimental to the horse as well as the fence. And so isolation is really a problem mentally and physiologically for horses. Again, I mentioned horses are used to moving. So horses that are confined or restricted in movement, that's not the best for them physiologically. So again, we can have kind of some issues with digestion, colic, etc., as well as mentally. So psychologically, horses really have a desire to move. And so we want to make sure we fulfill that outlet with them. Again, they're very social animals. Horses enjoy interacting with other horses. And horses may also choose to interact with other species if they don't have that social contact. So I'm sure people have heard of animals that have different types of friends: pony friends, goat friends, chicken friends, dog friends. They really do have that social nature, which is probably why we have had such a great relationship with horses, why people and horses really do get along well together, because we're very social by nature, even if we're a little limited right now. The other part of a horse that we have to take into place is the nature of the horse. So we know horses are prey animals, and that means their survival instinct is always going to be flight. So again, that large cerebellum is all about fast movement, get out of dodge, coordinated response. Horses rarely are going to fight. Typically, the only time we'll see horses engaging in that fight response is if they're trapped or extremely frightened. We sometimes will see some territorialism where they're defending or doing some, like a dog, resource guarding. And certainly mares sometimes will engage with fight to defend their foals. So we always want to think about how the horse is perceiving the world and what is going to trigger some of those flight responses. So a shout out to some of our other equids, the donkeys. A lot of people, their experiences with donkeys and mules are actually that these are far less flighty species, that these are a little bit more rational thinkers, so to speak. Partially that may be, or at least the theory, is that donkeys actually are a little bit more native to more mountainous terrain, a little bit more solitary of a creature. And so donkeys are more likely to be a little bit more careful and thoughtful in their response and not be so immediate in their reactions. So they're typically a little bit steadier Eddie type of species. So really pleasant little animals to be around. So again, a little bit more on our fight or flight, and then we'll jump into some kind of cool fun facts about how horses see. Hopefully we'll teach you guys something new. But again, horses really depend on their flight mechanisms for survival. So anything that horse is going to perceive in the environment that may be strange or a little bit scary, motion, they're going to choose flight. So when horses are actually choosing fight mechanisms, again, we talked about that territorialism, or if they're actually having some social disagreements, then that's where we might actually see some of that fight response where they're using teeth and feet, which can be pretty dangerous for humans, which is why we want to pick up on those behavior cues, and that's a different lecture. So this horse here, this is just a picture I pulled off the internet. I don't know where it came from, just found it. But this is a horse that would be classically engaged in a fight response. So he is clearly panicked at this point in time. This horse is trapped. So if anybody approached a horse in this sort of mentality right now, it's very possible that you could get hurt because that horse is going to lash out because it is in this trapped, frightened mentality. So something we always want to avoid in any sort of horse care situation. So we're going to talk and start now talking about the horse's senses, okay? So what the horses are perceiving and how they're perceiving it. So we're going to get a little sciencey here again. So if anybody wants to play along, again, we can see if you can name the senses. So I have 5 images that would be the 5 categories of senses the horse has. So if anybody wants to try and name what those senses might actually be. We'll start with an easy one. What would you call the sense here with their eye? Anybody wants to guess what that would be called? So that would be vision. So we're going for vision here. So the nose of the horse, what I'm trying to get here is the sense of smell, and that technically is going to be olfaction. So again, we're going to throw out some of the big science words here. So this is olfaction. So we have vision, olfaction. This horse here, I'm trying to depict the horse eating. So if we think about what sense that would be, so think about their sense of taste, that would be gustation. So the fancy word for that. Ears, this is going to be what the horse hears. So if we're going to put a word on that, that's going to be their auditory sense. Okay, so or audition. And then hopefully you can tell this is actually a picture of skin. So the horse's ability to perceive touch. And that would be tactician. So again, we're actually trying to teach everybody some of the fancy words for the horse senses. So we have our vision, olfaction, gustation, audition, and tactician in the horse perceiving the world. So if we go back to ethology a little bit and think about what should a horse see. So if you're a wild horse, you need to see this, right? Because if you don't see this guy right here, you're a dead wild horse. Your genes don't get to get passed on. It's not a very fun day. So for a horse, they don't really need to see the fine details of this cat, right? They probably don't need to pick out, oh, look how many whiskers he has. He has a cute little pink nose. What they need to pick up on this mountain lion rapidly is movement, right? So anything that is sort of sneaking up on that horse, that movement piece, is going to be what a horse needs to see. So if we really think about the vision of the horse and how it perceives the world, it is set up to help them survive. So we're going to go through how they see the world. Some of these might be things that you guys already know, but we're going to try to put some details on that. So again, the vision of the horse is mostly going to be about motion. So they're really, really good at picking up motion, but they don't have the same visual acuity or their ability to see those fine details that people have. So this is going to, their vision again is about motion. Cool fun facts about horses. They have some of the largest eyes of any living mammal. So other than whales, and whales are big. So horses really do have pretty big eyes compared to other animals of their body weight. They can see in much lower light intensity, and we're going to give you some fun facts about that later on. And again, they do not have the same ability to see details. And so when we talk about visual acuity, it's can they see the differences essentially in lines? What is their ability to discriminate between images close together? That's kind of how you measure visual acuity. Some other fun facts about horses. Their pupils are horizontal, and horses have something that's called a visual streak. And that's where they have more density of the retinal ganglia, okay, that allow them to see the world. And so you'll often see horses that are trying to look at something, and trying to focus on it. When they do that head tilt, they're actually trying to get that image where it is best seen by that visual streak. So kind of some fun facts about why horses move their heads that way. So visual field in a horse, many people have heard horses have both binocular, meaning two, right? So they are seeing something with two eyes, as well as monocular vision. So mono is one. So the binocular field of the horse is what it sees in front of them. So what that horse is perceiving with both eyes at the same time. So and we can always usually tell when a horse is using binocular vision, when the ears go forward, that means they're using binocular vision. And then depending on what they do with their head and neck, if they're raising it up, that object they're trying to focus on is further away. If they lower it down, they're trying to focus on an object that is closer to them and closer down to the ground. So again, that can kind of tell you, head up, ears forward, object is further away, head goes down to look at a specific object that is closer to them, lower to the ground. The monocular field of vision, which is what that horse is perceiving with one eye, is really what allows horses to stay alive. Okay, so again, if we're thinking about our wild horse perspective, and that horse being able to pick up motion from a predator, that's what monocular vision is all about. Now, we always talk about and warn people that horses have blind spots, and so my little images here is where the horse can't see. So essentially, the blind spot goes directly behind the horse. Okay, so this is where the horse can't see, and that blind spot extends over the top of the horse and under his belly. So if you think about the horse in 360 view, that blind spot isn't just behind their tail, it goes up and above their head, back down and around. Now, one thing to remember, a horse can shift their blind spot, and they can do that easily by turning their head. So that blind spot actually is a little bit mobile and always refers to where their head position is. So remember that can shift around a little bit. So horses really do have a limited ability to focus on a single object like we do. So you can tell with my picture of this foal here. So ears are forward, always an indicator of binocular vision. You can tell he's lowering his head and neck. And this is pretty easy for us to figure out. The cat is also looking at the horse, so both of them are looking at each other. But he is investigating this cat. He's probably going to continue to lower his head and neck as he approaches this cat to see what's going on. So it's pretty easy to tell this baby horse here is using binocular vision. Also important to remember, binocular vision is actually very important for horses to have depth perception. But remember that horses don't have the same ability to see that as we do. So why horses sort of balk at creeks or white lines on the road, etc., they're not really able to see that as well as we do. So a lot of misunderstandings of horse behavior is actually misunderstandings of horse senses. So I thought it'd be fun to show you a little video and let people chime in on what they see in how the horse is perceiving the world and how you can tell. So I'm just going to run this little clip. So if we watch our group of horses here, you can, if you're really watching their head and neck, you can see what the horse is focused on. So you could see the horses became excited, those heads and neck came up. The object originally was further away, so I actually brought out this fun pink balance ball for the horses to see. But you can see as they, and we'll replay this one again, go back through this. So the arched head and neck, elevated head, ears pricked forward, that mirrors looking in the distance. You can see all these horses are engaging in binocular vision at that point in time. Now as they approach the stimulus, my nice fun ball, you're going to see them lower their head to try to get that in focus. You'll also notice that they're pretty reactive at this point in time and pretty nervous. So that's pretty normal horse behavior, that they're going to be a little bit more reactive when they're looking at something that's novel in their environment. Some other fun facts about horse vision. So we have trichromatic vision, so we see the red, blue, green spectrum. whereas horses actually do not. So they see more in these greeny, olivey green blue tones. So they're not going to pick up all those reds and purples that we see. So horse vision is actually quite a bit different than us when it comes to color vision, but they're not colorblind. So that's kind of an old myth that horses couldn't see color. They really can, just different than us. But what I think is kind of fascinating is how they figured this out. So part of it, yes, you can look at the anatomy of the eye and figure out, oh, these things are the same between rods and cones, but they actually did put this to the horse test. So we're going to go through how they actually did this. So this is actually a fun study that some researchers did. So they actually trained some horses on some pretty sophisticated discrimination tests. So the horses were trained to do this all on their own. So this is some pretty good horse training here that they did. So the horses were trained when they would enter into the testing room. They would go over here all on their own. Nobody led them here. So this is horses in the research chamber. The horse would go into this little space in these cones. So you could see they made this little space for the horses. The horse would walk in, go into his little cone. He would stand behind this little, it's just PVC pipe, and he would wait patiently until they were going to do his test. So then they would let these pictures appear. So they'd have two plates. They essentially slide open so the horse could look at them. And they train the horse to pick out the one with the circle. So the horse would have to pick between the plate that had nothing or the plate with a circle. And then as they went, they would change him to see if the horse could see the color. So what the horse would do, again, this is pretty fun, the horse would, after the little PVC pipe would lower down, the horse would go to the object, okay? So he had to pick the plate that had the circle on it. So they trained him first to pick the circle. So they weren't trained to just like randomly go touch things with their nose. The horse would have to go to the correct plate and then hold their nose on it. And so they would hold their nose on it until they would hear the reward. So they would get rewarded for food in another bowl, but they would not get the food until they pressed their nose onto the right thing. If the horse picked the wrong thing, they would get a, in the dog training world, this is probably more familiar to people, an NRM or a non-reinforcement marker. So that essentially means you chose wrong. So they would get an auditory signal that said that was the wrong choice. So the horse learned either if I chose the right thing, I would get the reward in the food dish somewhere else, or if he chose the wrong thing, he'd hear the sound that says, no, that was the wrong choice. So following either the NRM, the non-reinforcement marker, or the food reward, the horse would go back all on its own. So this is the really cool part. The horse would go back without a handler, go stand in his little cone part, and wait for his next test. So again, really, really fascinating how they did this to figure out if the horse could see colors. So then essentially, this is the test that you would do for children before they have reading skills. So they took the horse through a series of multiple horses, so this just wasn't one horse, a series of tests to determine if they actually could still pick out the plate that had the circle on it. So really, really cool. Again, amazing that they trained a whole bunch of horses on how to actually go through this vision test. So some other things that people want to think about when we're thinking about vision in horses and depth perception and using that binocular vision. So that binocular field of vision for the horse, if the head is up, it's extending out in front of them. And if the head is down, essentially they can only focus down below. So how we ride horses and what we do with their head position actually changes quite a bit their field of vision. So these little yellow lines here and our little dressage horse here, who is essentially held in the bridle and collected, his visual field with his binocular vision is essentially straight down in front of him. Versus jumpers, horses that are ridden to jump fences, they have to allow their heads to be up so that horse can see the object out in front of them and judge essentially the height and depth of that fence. So how horses are ridden actually is pretty important as to what they can see. So if you think about this classic head position here, the original cavalry horses were horses when horses were held in that collection in the bridle like that. Essentially, it took out that big wide field of vision. So imagine you're a cavalry horse. You probably don't want to run towards people that want to poke you with swords or pikes or whatever they poke horses with in the old days. So you would essentially get that horse only be able to focus on the ground in front of them as they went forward. So the horses were actually much more controllable. And so kind of some unique things about why maybe we do what we do with horses. So some other fun facts about horse vision is their night vision. So horses actually do see in the dark way better than we do. So if you actually see that eye shine in those horses in this picture, that's the tapetum lucidum. So that actually helps reflect light back into the eye and allows them to see in the dark much better. So anytime you shine lights at animals, your dog, your cat, whatever in the dark, that eye shine back is that tapetum lucidum. So how did they figure this out? Again, so there's the biology where they can actually just examine horse eyes and their structure. And then another group of researchers, actually I think they were the same ones, same model of testing, did these discrimination tests with horses in the dark. So this is super cool. Again, they had horses choosing between triangles or circles. So they were trained to choose one of these objects meant they would get a food reward. And so you can see here's his little food bin that he's going to get that food reward in. So they would train them first. You have to find the circle, means food reward. If you go to the triangle, you get an NRM, non-reinforcement marker. You got to start back over again. So then they kept testing the horses and kept making the lights lower and lower and lower. So kind of the fun fact is the horses could still perform this test, this discrimination test, at light levels that the humans couldn't see anything anymore. The horses were actually still able to not only do their little discrimination test and pick out the circle, but the horses could also find their way back to their little holding place between their cones and their stick until they would wait for the next test. So really, really cool. I just think that's fascinating on how they trained horses to do these vision tests. So horses are way smart, everybody. Yay, horses. So some other things they figured out with horses as well that we don't always think about. Horses actually see better on overcast days. So their visual acuity is better on days that are cloudy and overcast versus bright sunny days. So not that this really should make you say, oh, I'm not going to ride my horse on a bright sunny day. But can give us sometimes some explanations of why horses may act a little bit differently from day to day. It may actually be their ability to perceive the world. So kind of some fun facts about horse vision. Just some quick vision myths before we kind of wrap up for our webinar opening series. A lot of people will use the horses have to see, if they saw something on their left side, then the right side of the horse doesn't know the thing was there. That's not true. So the horse does know the thing was there. Horses may be very handed, like we are. So horses tend to be, left-leaded dominant. So people and horses have that same handedness, or their bodies will move a little bit differently from side to side. So yes, horses, if they saw something with their right eye, the whole horse does know it was there. Why they might spook coming back around the other way, perhaps it's shadowed a little bit differently. Who knows? That's a horse, but that is a little bit of a myth there. So just thinking about some other practical things for horses and their vision, we did talk about how head carriage really affects what the horse can see. So I think that's always important to remember when we're riding and interacting with horses. Thinking about where their head is really changes that horse's field of vision. So when we tuck that horse's head or ride them behind the vertical, the horse really can only see down at the ground versus if we need them to be able to extend that nose forward and see what's out in front of them. Again, horses see very, very different than we do. So very much a panoramic vision versus what we see. Horses also are pretty slow to adjust to light to dark, a little bit slower than we are. So a lot of times why horses are balking about going into horse trailers, entering into these big dark holes is not really what a horse wants to do. So really taking the time to train them through that. So we can train horses to go through a lot of different weird scenarios, but it just helps us out a little bit if we're thinking about how that horse perceives the world and maybe be a little bit more understanding for them with their quirky behaviors. So here's some other just random fun facts. They've also hypothesized that male horses see better than females. Who knows, but just some information that's out there. There's also some pretty believable data with horses as well as dogs. There are animals that have vision problems, just like we have short-sightedness, farsightedness. Animals have that same thing too. So again, I'm going to extrapolate a little bit on the dog side. Dogs, agility dogs that have jumping problems, we have something that's called early takeoff syndrome, where the dog really can't judge distance very well, and so that can cause some different behaviors with them. So horses can also have the same idea that they're near or farsighted, just like we can be. And then there's also some information about head shape and their ability to see as well. So there's different amounts of ganglial density in different shaped heads. So those horses that have, classical Arabian type head shape actually might be able to see a little bit better than some of the more convex shaped heads. So perhaps why, when we think about Arabians, is maybe a little bit more sensitive horses, and maybe because they see differently a little bit than our other breeds. So just some food for thought on some fun facts about horse vision. So that's where we're going to stop tonight, because I don't want to make our little sessions too long, and try to keep our chunks of information pretty easy to consume. So at this point in time, if anybody has questions about anything, I'm more than willing to answer them. So if you have questions, type them into the Facebook's live, or we'll go from there.